Hi, everyone. I show that it's just about 2 minutes before the top of the hour. So we're going to give folks just another minute or two to join us, and then we'll get started. So please stand by. We'll be with you shortly. All right, well, by my official timepiece, it is now the top of the hour. So let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Build Your Incident Response Plan, Cyber Attack Remediation Strategies. My name is Amber Coulson, Event Marketing Manager with Nuspire. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to mention just a few logistical items. First, the webinar should last about 30 minutes, but we are happy to stay on a bit longer to answer any questions as needed. Speaking of questions, you can send those in at any point in time during the presentation using the questions panel or the chat panel on your screen. We'll collect those and address them at the Q&A session at the end. And finally, you'll receive a couple things at the conclusion of today's webinar. First, you'll receive an email with a recording of the webinar within the next 48 hours, usually much faster than that. I would say usually within an hour or two at the conclusion of the session, you'll get that recording, followed by an email with a link to download your incident response plan template. With that, I would like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Jerry Nguyen, Nuspire's Director of Threat Intelligence and Rapid Response. Jerry has performed executive consulting, break investigations, and assessment work for Fortune 500 companies across the globe. He is joined today by Nuspire's JV Varma, playing the role of CSO at Acme Corporation in our mock cybersecurity exercise. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you, Amber. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. So today we're going to be walking through an incident with JV. I want to describe, what it's like to go through a major incident. The gut initial reactions, the feelings, and then the procedure that a typical customer would walk through. And then myself and JV as a CISO of Big Acme, we're going to walk through what changes need to be made for a response and how do we incorporate that into an incident response plan. And finally, we'll be sending out that incident response plan template to everybody that's in attendance. So I want to start off with some definitions. That way we're all speaking a common language. When I develop incident response plans for our customers, one of the biggest challenges is prioritization and categorizations of incidents. Some organizations do priority 1 through 4. Some organizations do categories 1 through 9 or 9 through 1. But for this webinar here specifically, I want to ensure everybody understands that a priority 1 is the highest criticality prioritization. That means if a priority 1 hits for Big Acme, they're dropping everything and responding. And when we talk about an incident response plan, we mean a cybersecurity incident response plan. And if you hear the abbreviation IRP, we're referring to the incident response plan that we're developing. All right, so let's set up the attack scenario. So JV is the CISO of Big Acme. Big Acme is roughly 800 employees strong, small IT team of 3 to 4 folks, and an IT security person. They just had an incident. One of the lessons learned from the incident is to create an incident response plan. So they're looking for options and speaking with an expert at Nuspire. And as we go through this webinar, one of the exercises is readiness for cyber threats. So you'll hear how JV, being the CISO, goes through his gut initial reaction all the way to what do we need to do next, what are best practices, and things like that. So I'll pause right here and let JV introduce himself before we jump into the scenario.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. So, as Jerry was mentioning, Big Acme is a company in the insurance space. We are a mid-sized company. We have about 800 employees, about 5 IT specialists, of which, and about 2 to 3 security people. And when I talk about my security team, we have some security credentials, but we are not the security experts. We do not have the capability to conduct, threat hunting or those kinds of activities. But most of our focus areas is on, things like managing and making sure that our firewalls are up to date and things like that. So we recently encountered an incident which we will be walking through and how we dealt with it.
Thank you, JV. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So you've had an incident, and speaking with you prior to this call, or to this meeting rather, we discussed it was a ransomware incident. So what was your initial reaction to being notified as a CISO that there's ransomware running around on your network?
Right. So as you were saying, Jerry, this was a ransomware attack that initially came to us as a phishing email. And we got notified with the fact that the HR systems were not accessible by the HR team. And that is what prompted further investigation. My first reaction was surprised. So, this is not something that I was expecting to happen. We do have a EDR solution in place. We also have a relationship with an MSSP in place. And and we didn't know what to do next. So surprise and kind of a panic. That is essentially what set in when we realized that there was a ransomware attack. We obviously the first thing that I did was we looked into how we categorize these incidents. We categorize some of these security incidents from priority 1 through 4, and this being a specific ransomware incident, we categorized it as a priority 1. And in our parlance, priority 1 essentially means anything that is an anomalous or suspicious event that could possibly be an attack that is in progress. So, surprise, that's my first reaction, and panic.
JV, you're definitely not alone with that initial reaction, especially for organizations of your size where you're faced for the first time ever a real world incident, and especially if it's ransomware. Systems are getting locked up. You don't have access to data anymore. You're afraid of data being manipulated and all that stuff. So, after that gut initial reaction, everybody settled down. Walk us through what happened. Who received the email? What did they do with it? How did it get to your attention? If you could walk us through that process, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely, Jerry. So as I was mentioning before, we do have some technologies in place to identify some of these things. And we also have a relationship with an MSSP, but the MSSP's primary focus is with regards to managing and monitoring the firewalls. We do not have the MSSP who is monitoring our entire infrastructure. So that's a gap that we have. But as I was mentioning before, we do have an endpoint detection and response solution in place. But as it happened, it started out with a report from the team saying that certain members in the HR department couldn't access certain folders and drives anymore. That's what kicked this off. But at the same time, we also got a notification from our EDR solution saying that there was something malicious activity that is going on. So that is what prompted us to look further into what was going on. So that is how we got notified. And our next step immediately was to make sure that we reached out to our MSSP to ask if they saw something malicious that is going on. And because the scope was just limited to firewalls, we actually did not see anything in the firewall data. But then even though we knew some actions had to be taken, we knew we had to reach out to potentially law enforcement. But our immediate action was to utilize our EDR tool and make sure that some of the systems which were infected were actually rolled back to its previously known good state. So that was our first reaction, to see whether our EDR solution could actually do something to take us out of the situation that we were in.
Yeah, so utilizing your current tools that you have at hand is a great first step. What were there any additional actions that your team took on the technical side of it to identify or scope it out even more, or was it purely an EDR situation where you used your EDR to scope out the extent of the infection?
Sure. Yeah. So EDR is where we got started. We realized which systems were the primary targets, who were targeted. So as I was mentioning before, we identified that this started out as a phishing email. So we scoped out who all could be potentially infected by clicking on that phishing email. And the initial action was obviously to change the passwords of those users who we thought were compromised. And we also essentially segmented out that specific HR network, which resulted in that initial ransomware breach. But outside of that, we didn't go beyond that. That's pretty much where we kind of halted our efforts as an initial response standpoint.
Gotcha. So here comes a loaded question for you. This procedure that you went through, was it documented anywhere, or was it just you just went and did the right things at the right time? No,
this is not something that we had documented. I mean, this is just we had a version. I wouldn't call it current, but when we did a penetration testing assessment and a couple of years back, we had a copy of a template of an incident response plan, but it was not updated. We didn't know what to do. It was not completely filled out. Some of the people who were with us 2 years back are not with us anymore. So there was certainly a knowledge gap in figuring out what to do next. So that's where we were. There was nothing current. We pretty much relied on what we had a couple of years back. So that is the result. That is the reason why we were in pretty much a panic mode at the very beginning.
Okay, so you're not alone in that. Every organization has an incident response plan of some sorts. Depending on the maturity of our customers. And one of the things we always ask when we're doing a post-breach exercise like this, it is to identify if there was an incident response plan or not. And the next thing we try to identify is two things. One, your technical response team. Were you able to recall everybody appropriately? Were you able to assemble and assign them tasks appropriately? Can you walk us through, how you handled the technical response side of the house?
Yeah. So as I was mentioning to you earlier, Jerry, we don't have a lot of security expertise in house, and myself and there is a team member. We are pretty much responsible to make sure that systems are up and running and these threats. We are preventing the organization from the threats. Now we beyond the small group of individuals. We did not really include any other executives or anybody from the organization. We have a process where we submit the current threats which are facing the company pretty much on a weekly basis to our senior leadership team or our executive team, including the CEO and the board. But when this incident occurred, that process did not kick in. I mean, we didn't have a process by which we had to reach out to the board or the CEO and get them into the loop. So that we have identified that as a big gap in the process.
Oh, that's fantastic that you've identified that. One of in my experience, when we're going through a breach like this, or when we're helping respond to a breach like this, it's always good to get executive buy-in from the very beginning. That way things are getting executed with the sponsorship of the executive team. business decisions are being made, as they're aware. I'm pretty sure while you were going through it, there was decisions, like you said, to segment off that HR network. It's very fortunate and refreshing to hear that you were able to do that without any executive support to be there to direct, those types of actions. Lots of organizations that I've responded to in the past, it's always that struggle of, we want to take this part of the network offline, but we can't do it unless we talked to XYZ. And those things take time, and if we had included the executive support team in from the beginning, we could update and post updates to that group almost live. And when a decision like this needs to happen, they know right away what's going on, the impact of it. That way we understand the business impact for a technical solution to our problem at hand. So that's great that you identify that. So talk more about the phishing email and who it was sent to. What did that person do besides double clicking on the link, obviously?
Yeah, so the phishing email, we try to stay ahead of it. We do a security awareness training on an annual basis, but this is not something that we train everybody to do on a recurring basis. So and we do have a process where we have asked our employees to reach out to us in case there is a phishing email, but we do realize that this is not something that we have ingrained in people's memory. If you see something malicious, send it to us. So and phishing happens all the time. I mean, we are not the only ones who get infected by these phishing emails, but how we respond to these phishing emails, I understand that is very important. So in this specific case, the employee received the phishing email. In fact, he clicked on it, and that's almost immediately, I would say. I mean, within a span of like a few hours, that's when we started observing these things. So from a awareness standpoint, it kind of helped us realize that only if you make sure that people are trained, people are educated on these, not to click on these phishing links, can we stay ahead of the game. I mean, it is always a cat and mouse game. We realize that.
Oh, absolutely. As we wrap up investigations, in my experience, most of them are as a result of spear phishing or phishing emails. And one of the things we always recommend as part of remediation is to have some kind of user awareness training, or making it easy for the user to report a phishing email and how to spot a phishing email. And that's part of continuous improvement. And that's something we definitely want to highlight in an incident response plan, as more lessons are learned through incidents, big or small, that we incorporate into some type of continuous improvement cycle. And that cycle should be documented in an incident response plan. So were there any additional details you want to share, after experiencing your first real-world incident? Like, what would have helped you make this, or help not make this, but help you go through this incident more efficiently, more at ease, etc.? Give us some final thoughts around that.
Sure. I think I mentioned to you about a document that we had, which we received a couple of years back. I wish we knew exactly who all the stakeholders, we had brought all the stakeholders together at first. Executive buy-in should have been absolutely necessary. I wish we had practiced, and I fully realize that just sitting it out there is not really, it's not enough, right? I wish we had practiced it. I wish we had conducted some sort of exercise to mock up a real incident. What would have happened in case of a ransomware? What would have happened in case of some other kind of infection that's going on, such as a crypto locker or a crypto miner that is happening inside the environment? So some real exercises would have been helpful. So that's probably my big takeaway, Jerry.
Thank you, JV. That's a great takeaway. That's a takeaway many of people that I've helped through breaches, in the past, that was their takeaway as well, was we wish we had more practice. We wish we updated documents. We wish, executives were brought in from the beginning, and as an industry whole, it's on us to continue to improve these types of things. So you're definitely not alone. Everybody agrees with those types of reactions. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's go over some conclusive changes that we could implement for you. So from the business side, in the incident response plan, we need to identify the participants from the business, be it a C-level executive, legal, HR, etc. And having an escalation process in place. You mentioned, there was one, but it's always good to formalize it inside of a cybersecurity incident response plan. That way, whether you or one of your senior managers refers back to the incident response plan, they know exactly who to call and who to inform, in case you're ever not available. Right? And also identifying technical resources to perform the analysis. You mentioned you have a small team, you rely on your MSSP. Let's make sure those resources are identified and included in the incident response plan. So when something does happen, there's a central location for somebody to get to a roster and make phone calls to people or direct analysis. And finally, testing. We got to test a plan on a regular basis. Lots of organizations that we help test their plan. We do it in a crawl, walk, run type of pace. And what I mean by that is crawling is the exercise includes, 1, making sure there's a plan available. 2, making sure people are aware of the plan and where it's stored at, and identifying ways of keeping that plan updated and applying it to everyday incidences, if you will. And then when we walk is when we introduce a more complex scenario for the IT team, the cybersecurity team, maybe even your MSSP, to go through an exercise where something major happens, like what you just went through, right? A ransomware attack. Now is the time to practice. So we want to pull in all the technical resources to respond in a simulated fashion. And then finally, the running tabletop exercise, includes the C-level executives. That way, the technical team and the business team can understand each other's responses and what is required from each side to respond better. And what I mean by that is, for example, on the business side, you have to make a PR statement or a public relations statement, and external communications, if you will. We want to make sure that external communication is concise with as accurate details as possible from the technical side. So that way both teams can understand what's going on and it's a unified message out. And some considerations to take place. You mentioned, a couple of your MSPs were focused on monitoring and managing only. Let's ensure you understand, you fully understand your MSSP's capabilities, what they can do, what their tools can do for you. A lot of, for example, management type of MSSPs where they manage and monitor, like in your case, they have tools that they can use to identify movement. In your case, the firewall MSSP. Let's document that. Let's put that into the incident response plan, and let's also put into the incident response plan their SLAs that they're required, because timeliness will break the deal. Like if we, in the incident response plan, if we don't understand the response of our MSSP and the times they're supposed to respond to us, that puts us as responders and yourself and your team, in pretty much of a bind of just standing by and waiting. So what do you feel as a CISO if somebody presented you this plan? Is this an acceptable plan moving forward? We need to draft this for you. What are your initial thoughts here?
Yeah, Jerry, I really wish I had done this in the past, and I was prepared. And this is exactly the kind of direction that me as a CISO of Big Acme should have received going into this year and before this ransomware incident had happened. So absolutely, I mean, this is the making sure that knowing the plan and then testing the plan is really important. And we understand that every incident is different. Ransomware is just one type of incident. There could be a variety of incidents. So understanding how to respond to these varieties of security incidents that could happen in the environment is absolutely critical. So any CISO, that's my advice to any CISO. If you are a CISO, make sure that you have an incident response plan. You test that plan. You know how to respond to a variety of incidents, conduct tabletop exercises. So that's my takeaway, Jerry.
Fantastic. Thank you, JV. And thank you for walking us through your incident. Thank you for providing those details. Always helpful for me when we're doing incident response development to have a very honest conversation about how you felt, what you did, what your teams did, what your MSSPs did. So thank you for that. So now let's take a breather, JV. Let's take off your mock play hat.
All right.
Wow. It's every time I respond to a customer, whether it be during a breach, post breach, or helping develop incident response plan, it's very stressful, not just for the customer, but for myself as well. Because I want to pull out all of my experience and help a customer develop a plan, right? So definitely very stressful. How did you feel going through that?
Extremely stressful, right? I mean, this is the part where I think practice makes it perfect, and that practice is going to make you feel a bit more confident. So without practice and without conducting it in advance, I mean, you can make mistakes and you're kind of winging it, which is not an advice that I would give anybody, especially in these kind of dire situations.
Fantastic. Yeah. So common questions during a breach. These common questions, whenever we write an incident response plan, should be answered. When we were role playing there, we talked about who's on the team, who do we call, who's working on the response, who do we have to inform, internal, external, PR, and how quickly should we expect a response from the people that we're working with to come back to, and finally, when is the incident over? Right. And, we touched on that with continuous improvement. It's, we could continue, rolling with the incident, doing more technical analysis, but when is it really over is up to the business. And each incident response plan is different and cater to that.
Yeah. So from our perspective, typically the response is over when we feel confident that there is no presence of any attackers in the company anymore. So that may end with incident response engagement, or we may have to include other, digital forensic services. So as you said, Jerry, you're right. It all depends upon the business that you are in and when the business feels confident. So I just want to, now that we transition to this slide, I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about Nuspire here. Nuspire has been in the business for over 20 years. We have 2 US-based SOC, and we deliver services to thousands of clients across the globe, across 40 countries. And the way that we try to differentiate our services is by packaging in incident response services to our MDR services. We also, just like how Jerry and I walk through right now, we can help companies develop incident response plans, conduct tabletop exercises, and also potentially get involved if there is a requirement for digital forensics. So these are the capabilities of Nuspire, and we welcome conversations and questions on how Nuspire can help you out in these situations.
Fantastic. Thank you, JV. And to add just a little bit more color into that, one of the cool things about Nuspire that I really enjoy is, you being the lead of threat intel and rapid response is our interaction with our SOC customers. One of my passions is helping customers, making sure they understand their security stack, their security policies, et cetera. And being able to interact from a digital forensics incident response aspect to our SOC customers is definitely something I enjoy doing. Having my team's offerings packaged into an MDR service just really enables us to do that. So definitely wanted to highlight that as well. All right, so thank you for joining us, everybody. We'll be emailing you an incident response template here soon. Please customize it for your organization. We also included a couple of examples of run books, chain of custody procedures, some call rosters, and things like that. But mainly, this should provide a good foundation of what an incident response plan should look like. We understand every organization is different, size, scale, etc. But I truly believe what we put out there is definitely a good foundation for you to build upon, and especially if you don't have one currently, it's a great starting point. So with that, we'll go back to Amanda, and we'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Jerry. So I know a few folks have been messaging me saying how much they learned and how much they enjoyed this presentation, so that's fantastic. If you do have any outstanding questions, you can certainly type them into the questions panel or the chat panel on your screen. Either one will work for us. In the meantime, we do have one question to get us started, gentlemen. Someone said, I noticed this exercise was with a smaller organization. Would your feedback change or your guidance change if this was with a much bigger company?
That's a great question, and I'll answer that here real quick. I just wanted to make a comment to one of the comments. Yannick, thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm well and my back is good. To answer the question of, we did this through a small company exercise. Yes, this advice is very applicable to organizations of any size. I think the core foundations of a good incident response plan was discussed here, and the response that JV went through is very similar to the response of big organizations as well.
Excellent. In addition to that, so we've talked a little bit, this was one tabletop exercise we went through, but what other tabletop exercises should an organization go through as they're practicing?
That's a great question as well. We touched on that a little bit when I talked about the crawl, walk, run scenario. Definitely those 3 types of exercises, if your organization can handle 3 exercises a year, I think that's a very good starting point. But as you mature your cybersecurity operations, your policies, and your plans, we highly recommend a quarterly approach to tabletop exercises of different types of scenarios. If you have, for example, a threat intelligence provider, or you have your own in-house threat intelligence, one of the things we always encourage, and we practice ourselves as well, is taking a look out there at your threat landscape and seeing what's out there that's trying to attack your business vertical, for example, and taking that information and formulating a tabletop exercise out of that. And depending on your organization, scheduling's all. The toughest thing about a tabletop exercise, in my opinion, is scheduling, not the actual tabletop itself. So if you can get on the same schedule with the folks you want to, definitely start with the IT team, the cybersecurity team. If senior leadership is available, definitely include them as well. That way, everybody understands what the true threat landscape is and what can actually really happen versus what can maybe or might happen.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, I am not seeing any other additional questions that are coming in. If you are watching the presentation today, or you're watching a recording of this later, and you do have questions, feel free to submit them to us, webinars@nuspire.com, and we'll absolutely get an answer for you as quickly as possible. This is our last webinar of 2020. Which is exciting in some ways, but sad in others. But we do have a very robust webinar schedule coming out for 2021. And that information will all be on our website in the coming days and weeks. So please check out nuspire.com/events for more presentations like this one. As a reminder, you will get 2 follow-up emails from us at the conclusion of this webinar, one with a link to the recording, one with a link to the downloadable and customizable incident response plan template. If you don't get those within the next, I would say, 48 hours, again, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll troubleshoot that for you. Finally, on behalf of Nuspire and all of our presenters, thank you for joining us today. Happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.